Chair recognizes the honourable member.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise again on behalf of the good people of St. Barnabas, Madam Speaker.
Is
Yes,
he stand by?
yes, yes, you speak after me. Thank you. Just grateful to Almighty God, Madam Speaker, for the grace that God continues to provide for me, despite my imperfections in all of my various capacities. But I work diligently on my knees and in my consciousness, Madam Speaker, to be better than I was yesterday and better than I was even an hour ago, Madam Speaker. And obviously for all of us, we will continue on that journey for the rest of our lives, Madam Speaker. Again, Madam Speaker, it's a privilege as well to be a citizen of the greatest country in the world, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and all that embodies within the Bahamian people, and all that is promised for us by our Creator. Madam Speaker, I don't intend to be very, very long, Madam Speaker. I don't intend to be very, very long. But I just want to share a few thoughts on these very important pieces of legislation, Madam Speaker. Before I do so, Madam Speaker, I made a commitment to my daughters, who just graduated from university, and they said, you know, Daddy, sometimes y'all only talk about Bahamians on certain occasions. Y'all need to talk about the great accomplishments of Bahamians more, especially those of you, Daddy like you, who are in Parliament, that has this larger platform, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, for the foreseeable future, and as long as God gives me breath, I will attempt to, every time I make a contribution in this House, Madam Speaker, to highlight ever so briefly Bahamians who have achieved great excellence, who've been great pioneers, particularly in those industries, Madam Speaker, that relate to the bill we are debating, so that I can hold fast to that commitment to my daughters, as well as humbly and hopefully bring some edification or just reaffirm, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, I believe that that is vitally important to our development as a country, Madam Speaker. I'm minded every time I come in the House, and I say this sincerely, and I have to preface my remark because, you know, sometimes politics you can be so jaded with politics, you confuse people's motivation. But every time I come in the House and I see the member for Angleton, for example, I'm reminded, and we ought to be reminded, Madam Speaker, that as Bahamians, the member for Angleton now is the longest serving female member of Parliament in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Yes, and she should be commended for that, Madam Speaker, and I say that sincerely. So, Madam Speaker, we're here to debate these compendium of bills, Madam Speaker, and I just wish to highlight, four persons, Madam Speaker. The first being Albert E. Forsyth, Madam Speaker. Albert E. Forsyth. And he was born on Fowler Street and later attended McGill University in Canada. Dr. Forsyth was known as a Bahamian pioneer in aviation. And it says here that with Dr. Forsyth at the wheel and under the headlights of local cars, that he landed a plane on solid ground here in Nassau in 1934, And they make sure to say until then, only seaplanes flew into the Bahamas. And it has been said that foresight on that flight had helped to develop air tourism to the West Indies. And in fact, Madam Speaker, chapter of Black Pilots of America is named in his honor, a Bahamian, Madam Speaker. And Dr. Forsythe was inducted into the Smithsonian Air Museum and has been honored by the U.S. Post Office, Madam Speaker. That is, Madam Speaker, Bahamian pilot Dr. Albert Forsythe, Madam Speaker. Additionally, Madam Speaker, would like to recognize today and remember today and honor today Captain Francis Smith, Captain Gwendolyn Ritchie, and Captain Gail Sanders, who are all the first female captains to work for our national flag carrier, Bahamas Air, in its 40-year history. And so we salute those women and Dr. Forsythe, who are Bahamians, who would have again illuminated the corridors of Bahamian history in the aviation sector. Madam Speaker, the member for Exuma, Madam Speaker, started off his presentation this morning. I thought he was on a good wicket, Madam Speaker. And then he made the statement that we don't want no slopping up in here today. That's what he said? You don't want no slopping up in here today. That's what he said, no slopping up in here today. And so, Madam Speaker, the honorable member did in fact do some slapping up that I wish to address, Madam Speaker. Well, some people say truth. He said slapping up, he didn't say truth. Oh, he spoke truth, okay, Madam Speaker. And I just for the record, Madam Speaker, this recent discourse, if you will, Madam Speaker, about our tourism numbers, Madam Speaker, and on how the leader of the opposition, the member for Marcos City's comments were mischaracterized, in our view, Madam Speaker, relative to the tourism numbers and stopover visitors versus cruise ship passengers, and the fact that we are all elated. We were all elated even at the lunch break when you walk downtown and you see the number of tourists here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas here in our country. That is always a good thing, Madam Speaker, always a good thing. And anybody who says otherwise, that it's not a good thing, is being irresponsible, Madam Speaker. And so I think that's not the question. I think for all of us, the question is, how do we make our tourism product better? That's something we all want. How do we make our tourism product better? And the member for Marcos City, as has been the case, as I said earlier, the member for Exuma, in his capacity as Minister of Tourism, and on past occasions in this House, even when he was in opposition, talked about how do we increase, Madam Speaker, how do we increase those persons, those tourists that spend more monies, Madam Speaker, even though we are grateful of every tourist that comes to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for however long, Madam Speaker. How do we, in terms of our tourism product, increase that high-valued spender, if you will, Madam Speaker? And it is a legitimate question. It isn't anything to play politics with. It is something that I'm sure the professionals at the Ministry of Tourism, they are thinking about every day, Madam Speaker. So that's not to diminish what we have done or what's even in play, but it is something that we must constantly be focusing on, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I read for you here, Madam Speaker, article from the Bahamas Hotel Association from Sandy Sands, just talking to the Bahamas must target 70% cruise visitor ratio, and that right now that ratio is too low. All right? And I don't have to read the total or read the article. Obviously, Sandy Sands, obviously, his reputation precedes him. But the point is that how do we do that, Madam Speaker? And even the issue of capacity, the member for Exuma talked about in the 24-25 budget about us being our country, needing some 15,000 rooms. And so, I mean, the question of capacity is always a question. I don't know. The Atlantis Beach Tower has been shuttered for a while. I don't know if it's opening up. And so, what are the plans for us to increase capacity, Madam Speaker? And Madam Speaker, it is something that we must constantly address. Over the last 35 years, Madam Speaker, our stopover, and I stand to be corrected, has increased by 35%, but in places like Jamaica, it's 288% in the last 33 years. Cuba, 500%, Dominican Republic, 1,000%. So it is a legitimate question that we should continue to encourage each other, to support the professionals whose job it is to figure out how do we get more of certain types of visitors to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, right? How do we make travel to the family islands or the destinations of our family islands even more attractive to get more visitors? All of this, I'm sure, is a part of the strategy or strategies at the Ministry of Tourism, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, also of note, I constantly hear this refrain about the members on this side who are members of Parliament for Grand Bahama, and you hear the refrain, it was 5 of them, and what didn't happen, and essentially, and paraphrasing here, that they let Grand Bahama down, Madam Speaker. But I find it fascinating, Madam Speaker, that the member for Exuma, Madam Speaker, as he stands up to push that refrain, Madam Speaker, the first thing he should do, Madam Speaker, is apologize to the people of Grand Bahama. He should apologize to the people of Grand Bahama and let one of his other colleagues probably articulate that refrain, because he was the one that spoke about this Grand Lucayan deal, Madam Speaker, that what was supposed to be the foundation of the Renaissance and change of the Grand Bahamian economy. That's what it was heralded as. That's what it was, and Grand Bahamians were hopeful. Even the members on this side, I'm sure if you talk to them, they were hopeful too. Especially that the government canceled the deal before, but they said that Grand Bahama was going to be grand again, that the magic was coming back, that this was part of the overall vision and anchoring of the economy, the Grand Bahamian economy, a new Grand Bahama. But the member for Exuma who came into this, he came into Parliament, Madam Speaker, came into the Parliament on the government's website. DPM Cooper tables communication on the sale of Grand Lucayan in the House of Assembly. And there's a quote here, said, not only does Electra have a plan for the resort, but it has a vision for its future in Grand Bahama that includes the growth of the overall economy and community, Madam Speaker. So the government, as a part of their platform and vision for, again, transforming Grand Bahama, had at its very foundation the sale of this hotel, Madam Speaker. But yet, Madam Speaker, yeah, you keep on hearing it's still coming. The point is, it has not come, Madam Speaker. It has not come. And maybe, before the member gets up and berate the members opposite, he needs to apologize to Grand Bahama, the people of Grand Bahama, that we are sorry, that I am sorry, that we have let you down, that we have not yet fulfilled that promise, Madam Speaker. And then, Madam Speaker, I'm sure you can have now a real debate about what's happening in Grand Bahama and what should be happening, Madam Speaker. They also promised, Madam Speaker, The member for Exuma promised $1 billion in investments, Madam Speaker. East Grand Bahama was $1 billion? $2 billion, okay. Right, $2 billion, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I'm just a humble man giving humble advice to the member for Exuma. Let one of his colleagues get up and talk about Grand Bahama first before he gets up, because he has some apologizing to do to the people of Grand Bahama, because the very foundational piece of policy has yet to be realized in Grand Bahama, Madam Speaker. Sorry? Madam Speaker, also, Madam Speaker, talking about civil aviation, as was expressed earlier, Madam Speaker, the Bahamian people still have some questions about the $2.5 million plane, Madam Speaker. The $2.5 million plane, Madam Speaker, that the member for South and Central Andros said when we were in committee, said that the $2.5 million acquisition, that was the line item, said that it was for the procurement of a plane. Now, obviously, since then, some persons laugh and say, oh, how could you buy a plane for $2.5 million? The member for East Grand Bahama stood up and asked, well, actually, let me just backtrack 2 steps. It said that this was being purchased for government officials, civil servants to travel around the country for work purposes, Madam Speaker. That was the reason. The member for East Grand Bahama got up and asked, so let's be clear, this is not Bahamas Air purchasing a plane. He said, no. We asked questions about the type, all sort of additional questions about the acquisition of this plane. It was never said at that time that this was a confiscated plane. The member for South and Central Andros said he would get back to us, Madam Speaker. Since that time, Madam Speaker, we've heard so many variations of what this plane is for, so many variations, Madam Speaker. So the Bahamian people would like to know, since we now hear that it is a confiscated plane that changes the original communication of what was communicated and how the plane was going to be acquired. We also now hear all these different reasons for how the utilization, what's the utilization plan of the plane. There's so many different reasons, Madam Speaker. There's so many different versions of things, explanations, Madam Speaker. The member for Freetown, the Minister of National Security, who said that it's for firefighters, it's for surveillance of our borders, who also said that, you know, sometimes you have to put a gurney on the plane and to help people who have emergency travel. He didn't even know, Madam Speaker, that the line item wasn't even in his budget. But he told the media it was in the national security budget, Madam Speaker. But the member didn't even know it was in the Ministry of Finance budget, in the capital expenditure, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, it's a simple question about clearing up how will the plane be used? What is the story behind the acquisition of the plane, Madam Speaker? And again, the member for South and Central Andros told the Parliament that he would be back to give us the correct information, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there's a lot of talk today, understandably so, Madam Speaker, about airports. We know, Madam Speaker, that our country is fortunate to have a lot of absolute advantages, Madam Speaker, in our sun, our sand, and our sea, and our geography, where we are, Madam Speaker. And so what we obviously do and want to do is continue to work on the competitive advantages, to those things that we can work on to ultimately continue to separate us from the rest of the world, Madam Speaker. And so as it relates, Madam Speaker, to the aviation sector, Madam Speaker, these are very important regulations because we want to make sure that our sector, our aviation sector, continues to remain safe, Madam Speaker, and not only safe for persons who visit the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, but for our own people. We are, like my mama used to say, we are a traveling set of people, which is a good thing, Madam Speaker. And not only traveling, and I don't know, and this is just my eye test. I'm not saying this is what the numbers say, and this is a good thing. It seems as though Bahamians are even traveling more to the family of islands, which is good. I mean, to me, going to regattas now and seeing persons from Nassau in particular, and everybody just going to the various regattas throughout the family islands. It's a wonderful thing. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, we were at Crab Fest recently, and I saw Nassauvians at Crab Fest who I hadn't seen in 10 years. So, Madam Speaker, it's a wonderful thing, Madam Speaker. So the point is, these very important pieces of legislation that make regulation better, more efficient, to meet international standards, to meet FAA standards. It's vitally important, Madam Speaker, to our sector, aviation sector, Madam Speaker. Other colleagues have said here, and likewise, support the bill and support the bills and support the amendments, Madam Speaker. This issue about airports, I just wish to share on this issue of airports, Madam Speaker. It's 28 airports that we have, the 28 airports that we have. And obviously a lot, all of these family island airports don't necessarily, don't charge any particulars or charge certain fees, Madam Speaker. And so definitely the $2 or $3 million that has been budgeted over the many years is not sufficient. So the need for the PPPs is understandable, Madam Speaker, if we want to ensure that these airports are, that they advance, not only from a structural standpoint, but also from a technological standpoint, Madam Speaker. The only thing that we do emphasize is that when it comes to these PPPs in terms of, full disclosure of how they will operate, what does it mean for the Bahamian people in terms of costing and whatever exposure it means financially for the Bahamian people, Madam Speaker. But we have a beautiful country, Madam Speaker, that has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. I always think about how, even from a development standpoint, as you seek to develop even more the family of islands, I'm sure there's a balance. In my view, there's a balance, because if you talk to some family islanders, and obviously there are members of parliament that represent family islands here, depending on where you go, some persons on those islands don't want that type of development in their area, depending on where you go. And then it changes the dynamic of what that family island may become. Because in my experience in the hotel industry and in the hospitality industry, there are people who, they love the island experience. They just come to Nassau for a short bit, but really where they want to go is to one of the other family islands where they have the peace and tranquility. And that's why I understand when I talk to family members who are from Auckland, and they come to Nassau, and they see you, and they say, how long you here for, man? Not long, I came back to Auckland, man. Nassau too crazy, And when they mean Nassau is too crazy, they love their way of life, and I understand it, Madam Speaker. Also, Madam Speaker, speaking about airports, Madam Speaker. So there was a notice, Madam Speaker, RE South Bimini International Airport, MIBS, PADP fees. These fees, Madam Speaker, for now Bimini Airport, Madam Speaker. So now all passengers, Madam Speaker, flying from Bimini on a domestic flight to Nassau or Freeport, or wherever, must now pay $20, a $20 passenger facility fee, a $5 passenger processing fee, a $1 passenger levy, Madam Speaker, total of $26. And in 6 months, on January 1st, these fees will go up by another $6 to $32. And on international flights, Madam Speaker, Bahamians leaving Bimini will pay $40 passenger facility fee, $10 passenger processing fee, $1 passenger levy, $51 in total. And also again, in 6 months, Madam Speaker, January 1st, these fees will go up by another $7 to $58, Madam Speaker. Now, Madam Speaker, when you compare that, that's Bimini. And I hope that the member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini speaks to this, right? When you compare LPIA fees, right, $10 for passenger fee facility fee, $10 passenger processing fee, $20 in total, Madam Speaker. So NAD will charge Bahamians $20 to use LPIA, while the new operators of the Bimini Airport will charge Bahamians $26 or $6 more, 30% more, Madam Speaker. Outrageous, Madam Speaker. $38 passenger for international, $38 passenger facility fee, $10 passenger processing fee, total of $48. And so now NAD will charge Bahamians $48 to use LPIA, right? But the new operators of the Bimini Airport will charge Bahamians $51 or $3 more, Madam Speaker. 6% more, Madam Speaker. The disparity. And so a lot of Bahamians are asking about that disparity, Madam Speaker. And it is something that we hope that the government can elucidate a little bit more on, Madam Speaker, because people are complaining as they should, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I take my seat, Madam Speaker, it is my privilege, Madam Speaker, to contribute to this debate today. Again, these are very important pieces of legislation, and we agree. We do feel that obviously one of the signs of a mature democracy and a mature parliament, Madam Speaker, is that where we can find common ground, Madam Speaker, and common understanding and common appreciation for what needs to be done on particular pieces of legislation, Madam Speaker, we should come together, Madam Speaker. And so this is vitally important, Madam Speaker, and including the amendment to the law reform bill, correct? Yes. The law reform bill, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, grateful again to the people of St. Barnabas and this Parliament for the opportunity to contribute, Madam Speaker. And may God continue to bless you, Madam Speaker, and may He continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you very much. Thank you.